Welcome to Chase Thoughts. My name's Chase. Today I'm going to be talking about how General Hux could have ended the Resistance at the opening battle in The Last Jedi. Now, this video does contain minor spoilers for the beginning of Last Jedi, well, the entire scene, basically, for the beginning of Last Jedi, and minor spoilers for Star Wars Rebels. So continue at your own peril. Now, before we begin, I did create a simulation screen that will give you a nice visual representation of what happens. I just did want to note that everything in the screen is not precisely to scale, but it should give you a good visual representation so you know exactly what is going on and what I'm talking about. Now, with no further delay, let's go into 3 things that General Hux could have done to end the Resistance as they were escaping at the beginning of Last Jedi. Starting with setting the scene. Now we know that the Resistance is well aware that First Order does know the location of their base. So at this point they're making a mad dash to escape before the First Order arrives. And Admiral Akbar shows up with the Zeratis and Vice Holdo shows up with the Ninka to aid in their escape. Catching them in the middle of their escape, General Hux exits hyperspace with 3 Resurgent-class Star Destroyers and 1 Mandator 4 Siege Dreadnought. The Mandator 4 is sitting at the apex of the fleet while the Resurgent-class Star Destroyer is sitting to the rear as its support ships. General Hux, from his finalizer, is at that point informed that they did in fact catch the Resistance in the middle of their evacuation. We know from the novelization that General Hux ordered his ships to not release fighters and for the Mandator 4 to destroy the Resistance base from orbit, his goal being to display this show of force to the rest of the galaxy to subjugate them through fear. We also know from the novelization that General Hux hated both the captains of his own flagship, the Finalizer, and of the Mandator 4 Dreadnought. Reasoning cited being the fact that they were both former Imperial commanders, for he full-heartedly believed that the First Order had improved upon all of the faults of the Galactic Empire, and that they were a superior incarnation to the inferior Imperial counterparts. Both his lack of fighter deployment and need to put the First Order's power on display allowed 1 fighter, piloted by Poe Dameron, to get within meters of the bow of the Mandator 4. From this position, Poe was able to further distract General Hux while his attack group got in position. Poe was then able to activate experimental equipment that was just recently installed on his X-Wing and begin his trench run on the Mandator 4's defensive laser cannon emplacements. This left the Mandator 4 scrambling to release fighters to not only intercept the attacking Poe, but the entire incoming attack group. Bringing us to our first solution, which is that General Hux should have ordered a TIE fighter screen released as soon as they entered the system to protect their ships from any incoming ship combatants. This would have stopped Poe and his attack group from even getting close, for they would have had to rip through the TIE fighter screen before they would have even had a chance to take out the destroyer or any of its supporting ships. And they had more TIE fighters in supply than necessary to do so. We know that each Resurgent-class Star Destroyer was equipped with 2 wings of TIE fighters, a wing we know to be about 72 ships, meaning that each ship was in supply with 144 TIE fighters. This brings us to a total of 432 TIE fighters between the Star Destroyers alone, and we know that the Mandator 4 released at least 13 fighters in the movie, bringing our total on station, if the 13 fighters were the only fighters available in the ship, to 445 fighters, more than enough to overwhelm the attack group in just pure numbers. The battle that ensues from this point would be a lot like the scene from Star Wars Rebels, where Hera Syndulla leads an attack group of X-Wings to assault Lothal through Grand Admiral Thrawn's blockade. While the X-Wings were able to breach the blockade, they were confronted with an overwhelming number of TIE fighters once they reached Lothal's atmosphere, destroying their group completely. And I believe that a similar scene would take place. They definitely had the numbers to do so, wiping out the entirety of the Resistance attack group, or stopping the Resistance from ever attacking in the first place, leaving Leia Organa with the decision of slamming her fleet headfirst into the TIE fighter's screen or abandoning those on the base who had yet to evacuate. Speaking of base evacuation, this brings us to the second mistake that the First Order did that could have been easily rectified to change the course of the battle. During the attack on the Siege Dreadnought, we see that its large siege cannons were able to charge and fire, destroying the base completely planetside, accomplishing General Hux's objective. We also see that the cannons are almost able to launch a second time, and we know from the novelization that if this cannon would have fired a second time, it would have ripped through the Radish's shield and destroyed it in a single shot. Bringing us to my second solution, which would have been to simply inverse the firing order. Even without a fighter screen, the First Order was still able to fire that first shot. So if they would have instead targeted the vessels that were aiding the escape of the planet and destroyed them, that would have left the fighters with no capital ship support, and it would have left the planet itself with no means of escape. Then they could have targeted the base on the ground with their second shot, still accomplishing Hux's objective. If the Mandator was still destroyed before launching its second shot, this would have only been a minor loss for the First Order, since they still had their 3 Resurgent-class Star Destroyers on station. The Resurgent classes and their overwhelming amount of TIE fighters could have then engaged the attack fleet, destroying it completely, and performing an orbital bombardment, destroying the rebel base from orbit, still accomplishing that original goal that Hux set out to do. My third and final solution to how Hux could have won this battle was actually the formation of his ships. General Hux positioned the Mandator IV at the apex of his fleet with its 3 supporting Resurgent-class Star Destroyers at its rear far behind it. This left them out of position to defend the Mandator IV from an incoming attack. If he would have instead positioned his Star Destroyers to the front of the fleet and his Mandator to the rear, they would have been in a better position to not only defend the Mandator from an incoming attack, but shield it completely. The loss of 1 Star Destroyer in Poe's attack would have been much smaller than the overall impact of losing a ship of this size and power. Though really all 3 of these solutions work best in tandem, operating as a 3-layer defense. The first layer being the TIE Fighter screen, the second layer being the Star Destroyers, and the third layer being the Mandator itself. From this position, the Mandator would have acted like an artillery ship, launching its cannons first to eliminate any orbital threat, starting with the Raddus being its highest threat target and the ship capable of carrying the most troops away. Though Hux was unaware that Leia Organa and Admiral Akbar were both on the Raddus during their attack, the destruction of the Raddus with their first shot would be heavily demoralizing for the entirety of the Resistance. Even if Leia and Akbar were on the ground rather than in the Raddus during the First Order's attack, the destruction of their strongest ship in orbit as the First Order's first target would be heavily demoralizing. At this point, the Resistance would have been left with 2 options, the first being to scatter their forces and flee, and the second being to be destroyed by the overwhelming might of the First Order. Either way, Hux would have been able to accomplish his goal of destroying the Resistance, able to track through hyperspace those who jumped away, and been able to easily wipe out all forces remaining in the sector. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section down below. And remember to rate the video and subscribe so you never miss another episode of Chase Thoughts. Until next time, this is Chase, signing off.